Right, so I guess we'll just get straight into the electoral campaign in London. You're an advisor to Lawrence Fox, so I guess we can assume how you're voting there. Would you like to tell us how the campaign's going and what you think his prospects are?
It's going fantastically. I think a lot of people in London and across the country, to be honest, are fed up of this established narrative. And when I say established, I mean mainstream media, the parliamentarians, pretty much the whole metropolitan liberal elite. They're all speaking from one approved groupthink mentality, and most normal, ordinary folks in this country are sick of it. So Lawrence Fox is offering an alternative message. It's going down a storm in London. Hopefully, that will translate into results for him. Let's see how that goes. But I think essentially what he's doing with Reclaim is offering an alternative opinion, an alternative perspective. And also holding the establishment to account. So, I'm traditionally a conservative. I've been, a supporter of the Conservative Party for many years, worked for them as well, advised them as well as advising Lawrence. And I think we need people on the right. We need people on the fringe like Lawrence to pull them back to the right because they're gradually shifting left, especially with the current regime. And much like we saw with the Brexit Party and UKIP, we need these parties, these smaller third parties, to kind of make sure that everyone is honest.
So that leads us nicely into another question I want to ask you. What's wrong with the Conservative Party? Why are they as they are, and what can be done about it?
Um,
I know
what's
that's
wrong
very
with them?
broad.
They're comfortable.
Yeah.
Complacency comes with time. They've been in power for a long time now, and unfortunately, we don't have an opposition. And speaking as a small C Conservative myself, I would like to see some opposition in government, in the House of Commons. We need that because the Labour Party have been pushing for the same things that the Tory Party has been doing, but just stronger and sooner, and that's just it's not very good at all. So yeah, the Tories are very comfortable, very complacent, and they've forgotten what they got elected for, what they got elected to do. They did get Brexit done, thankfully. I'm very happy and proud about that. But they've forgotten their conservative values. They've forgotten the liberal values as well of the party. To be honest with you, fiscally they're no longer right wing. Socially or liberally, they're no longer liberal. So it's kind of what do they stand for other than continuancy? They've got a legacy of what since 2010 they've been in power now.
Yeah.
They've made a lot of good changes. But what have they done since the last election? And I know COVID got in the way and nobody predicted that. It's been a disaster. It's been horrible. But I'm hoping once we come out of the other end of it, that Boris Johnson and his government will refine their grassroots, step away from this hyper green agenda, because we all care about the environment, but it can't be the pinnacle of government policy. Step away from that somewhat and move towards addressing these cultural issues that are affecting normal people.
So, what will the Reclaim Party do differently to the Conservatives? Because I completely agree with you, though. We need someone who is capable of effectively holding the Conservative Party's feet to the fire and presenting a viable alternative to the Conservative Party. Because, I mean, there's a recent scandal about Boris refurbishing Number 10 with donor money and things like this. And I don't think anyone would be as foolish as to suggest that the Conservative Party is free of this kind of corruption. And it's a very old edifice. So this sort of thing sort of builds up and the traditions build up over time within the party itself. So what is it the Reclaim are actually going to be presenting that's an alternative that is something that is worthwhile to the average voter?
Well, I don't suppose it's an alternative because it's not a party of power. Reclaim don't want to be in government. That's not how this country works. We have a two-party system. The third smaller parties don't really have a chance in hell of getting any MPs, never mind taking over government. What Reclaim is doing is kind of holding that government, holding that power to account. So, for example, every time Reclaim talks about a cultural issue, the next day, pretty much, the Conservatives address that issue or speak about it as well. So it's just making sure that those that are in power know the issues that most ordinary people care about and are addressing them and don't get too complacent, as we've talked about. So it is just elbowing them, pushing them back in the right direction. So it's not about competing, but that is how we get the results. So these parties of power think in terms of votes. And the moment that their vote share is threatened, they have to respond. So Reclaim Party, for example, will say they're going to stand in an election. That means that the Conservatives and Labour have to sit up and pay attention. And that's why they're a party rather than a pressure group or a think tank. But it isn't to get power. It is to make sure that power reacts to what people want. It's speaking truth to power. That's what it is.
So why is it that you think that the Conservatives aren't busy annihilating the legacy of Tony Blair and essentially undoing all of the damage that he has done to the country? Why do you think that is? Because I think that was... Sorry, just to fill this out a bit. Because as you said, they've been in power for a long time and they've managed to increase their share, haven't they? They've managed to find themselves with almost absolute power at this point. So why are they sitting on their laurels?
Question. That was the agenda. That was what they were supposed to do. And, Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson together, I honestly think would have accomplished that. It would have been amazing. They started on fixing the civil service. They had ideas about how to reform the House of Lords. Lots of different institutions need addressing. The NHS needs serious reform. The BBC, obviously I'm part of Defund the BBC, and that was on the agenda too. I'm sure Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson were in favour. Now that Dom Cummings has left, Boris seems to be less in favour of supporting the cause. But it comes down to COVID. It's changed everything. And this is all they think about and all they care about at the moment. And of course, it's very important. But we've reached herd immunity. The majority of vulnerable people have been vaccinated. We're at a point now where we can start to address other issues. And even if COVID was still going to be an issue for the next 5 years or so, we still have to address other things in our society. We can't neglect everything else in politics. So I honestly do think that was the agenda. It would have been great, but this... Chinese virus has kind of, shoved a spanner in the works.
It literally set politics back a year, didn't it? Okay, so one thing that I notice is that there's often a great deal of derision when any political candidates come forward with an expressly social concern and want to say, look, we want to talk about the social conditions of the country and what can be done about them. Because for some reason, and I think it's actually kind of a defensive reason on the part of the media because of a general left-wing bias within the media, but this is always treated with scorn. And I find that really interesting because social issues are the majority of a person's life. So these are actually really quite important things, and it seems to be a bit of an absence that the current government would essentially abscond their duty as being exemplars in these roles. And so I like the fact that, as you say, the Reclaim Party are actually going to be campaigning quite heavily on these issues. So could you tell me the sort of position that the Reclaim Party and Laurence Fox have on this? Because I think I've heard some good things, but I'd like to hear more.
So I'm not going to speak on behalf of the Reclaim Party or Laurence Fox. I'll leave them to announce their policies in their own time. But my advice to them would be that we need to speak up on these issues that people really care about. And we've seen from the government, and the Conservative Party in particular, is that even when they have been quite fiscally responsible at times, and even when they've been quite conservative in other ways, socially, they've always been very liberal and sometimes too liberal. And I think that is due to, as you mentioned, a fear of the media, because most ordinary folks in this country believe that there are two genders and that, people aren't necessarily racist just because they happen to be white. These are normal stances that people take. But the mainstream media and the establishment have this, critical race theory mentality and this identity politics mentality. And I think politicians are afraid of the media and the power that the media holds at the moment. That is why they subscribe to the woke agenda. They don't necessarily have to believe it, but they're playing politics. And, they can stand up there and say something really good about, being tough on crime and stronger policing. And then in the next breath say, but the police need to wear a rainbow flag and celebrate LGBTQ+++ month or something really ridiculously woke like that. And it kind of disconnects them from ordinary people. So what I would love to see is them pressured back into standing up for normal traditional values and not being afraid of that. And if the press don't like it, tough, that's their business, because we're all with them,
Yeah.
And they need to realize that. There are a few, Liz Truss, Kemi Badenoch, there are a few good parliamentarians in there standing up for normal common sense values. We've got a few freedom lovers like Charles Walker and Steve Baker as well. Mm-hmm. But they are slim pickings. They are the minority at the moment, and they should become the majority. And like you said, this is the strongest, as in terms of vote share and, number of seats, parliament that we've had in a long time. This is a centre-right government with an 80 strong majority. They should be able to push through some amazing policies and we want to see it happen. And that's what, my advice to the Reclaim and the Reform Party would be, is just make sure that happens.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.